Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals like John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
He said to me, clowns can get away with murder.
Dr. Death, the undoctored story.
This guy's dangerous.
And Epstein's shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
There was this whole other world going on.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Buried in the Backyard and Snapped. And with the Dateline 24/7 channel that's always on.
Did you want her dead?
You can't not obsess. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Every Friday night, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Okay, now, tonight we have a really, really big guest. This is one of these guys who, when I first decided to do a show on the radio, Scott Michaels is one of these guests that I've always wanted to have on, okay, because a lot of the information that I've learned from him is stuff that I talk about when I'm out doing my own interviews, when I'm being interviewed on other shows. So now, as a matter of fact, speaking of other shows I got coming up, I'm going to be on John B. Wells' Caravan to Midnight. That's going to be sometime in March. And then I'm also going to be on Danny Bonaducci's radio show in Seattle, coming up either in March or April. I got a really, really big announcement, okay? We're going to be doing a special episode of the Opperman Report this Sunday, March 9th, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time or 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And what we have on is we have our guests are going to be Jim Fetzer, Oli Demigard, and Mayor Jim Rothstein, who's the NYPD detective who made the arrest of Frank Sturgis. When Sturgis was on his way to assassinate Marita Lorenz, and who was, Fidel Castro's girlfriend. She was about to testify before the House Assassinations Committee hearings. And so Jim Rothstein arrested Frank Sturgis, and Frank Sturgis confessed to him that he was one of the shooters at JFK. So now Sunday afternoon, we've got a big show. Jim Fetzer, Oli Demigard, who is the owner of the website called lightonconspiracies.com. And we're going to have these three guests on. Now what's going on is that Jim Fetzer and Oli Demigard have uncovered, they have some really serious, credible death threats that they're getting, okay, because they've uncovered a witness who has given them information about a serial killer who is most likely the most prolific serial killer in recent history. And these two guys that they have uncovered allegedly are behind all the mopping up of the witnesses in JFK and RFK and even the John Lennon assassination. But many, many more, as well as assassinations here in this country and overseas, and also just murders that they've done for fun. So the witness they have, and we have even telephone recordings with them interviewing this witness. So now that's going to be this Sunday afternoon, March 9th, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. But back to tonight's show, which is my guest, Scott Michaels. Okay, now this guy is amazing, all right? He's behind the documentary called 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, which I think most people would agree is the definitive Charles Manson documentary. He's an expert on Charles Manson. He runs a tour bus in L.A. Called Duly Departed Tours, where he takes you can book him. He'll take you on his big giant bus. It's one of those big tour buses they got, and he'll take you around to all these historic locations and stuff. He's the owner of the website findadeath.com. And he also did another documentary called Duly Departed, which is another fascinating documentary that has all kinds of stuff in there about Black Dahlia. You might remember last week we had Steve Hodel on, who was talking all about the Black Dahlia murders. So here we got tonight. Introduce yourself, please, Scott Michaels.
Hello, Ed. Hi. Greetings from Hollywood.
Scott, I don't even know how to describe you. Okay? Usually when I have a guest come on, I say, okay, tell us a little bit about yourself because I want to get out their credentials, okay? But I don't know, man. Have you ever killed anybody?
Well, I've probably been responsible for a couple of career mishaps, but not actually anybody physically. No, definitely not. But I certainly make my living having to do with things of the dark nature like that. I mean, they say that what I provide is a vacation in someone else's misery.
So how did you get? Let's start from the beginning. How did you become fascinated with death and morbidity and murders and all that kind of stuff?
I grew up in Detroit, and it was sort of an unusual way to grow up. Well, not unusual for the people in Detroit, but I was around things that most people weren't around. When I was young, I had classmates that were murdered, and I saw car accidents happen in front of my home because we lived in a really busy area. And so I was sort of exposed to things like that when I was really, really young, so they didn't quite freak me out. In fact, I gravitated towards those things. It became more interesting to me when things like that happened. I remember, I had a classmate in particular that got killed, and she was taken to this house in this really terrible area, and it was indescribable what happened to her. But I remember taking my bike, and a couple of friends of mine rode our bikes out to that location to see it. I think it was sort of like Stand By Me, in a way, going to see where the dead kid was, and I just sort of embraced it. I went against the grain and pursued my interests. And lo and behold, I ended up in Hollywood owning a tour company.
So first you just had an interest, but when did you start making a living off of it? Was it the tour bus was the first thing?
Yeah, well, 20 years ago is when I made a conscious decision that I was not going to have a conventional job anymore, and came out to Hollywood to do this thing. At that point, there was another company that existed. It was called Grave Line Tours, and they used old Cadillac hearses. And Greg Smith, who owned the company, started the company, he was a hero of mine, and I wanted nothing more than to work for him. So at that point, I was living in Chicago, and I heard about Grave Line, so I came out and took the tour, and really, I've been obsessed with this death thing since I was a kid, especially the celebrity stuff. Hollywood Babylon, everyone read that. And reading biographies, I always flicked to the very end to see how they ended. That's what interested me the most. So I became friends with Greg, and lo and behold, I came out and took over the company 20 years ago. It's a sort of a convoluted story, but Graveline ended up going out of business, and I started my own.
Gotcha. Okay, so the first thing was the tour bus. How'd you get involved with the documentaries?
Well, a guy by the name of Mike Dorsey, who co-produced those documentaries and co-writes them with me, he, when I first started Dearly Departed Tours back in 2004, he and his mom took my tour, and he came back to me and said, maybe you'd be interested in doing something, something on video. He was an aspiring director and producer, which is he's quite successful at, and but at that point he was starting out like I was, and he came to me and said, "Do you want to do this?" So in our spare time, we put together what ended up being the first documentary you mentioned, Dearly Departed Volume 1, and we got some. I driving my tour bus through the city, I get to meet a lot of people, and I've met people that lived in places where notorious things happen. And I've had people say, "Oh, why don't you come up and check out my house?" And I sort of collected those invitations. And when Mike came to me to do this documentary, I called everyone up. I said, "We'd really like to do this now, and if you don't mind, we'd like to bring a camera." So we did, and got to some pretty good footage of some locations we'll never have access to again. So although the budget on the documentary was probably $100 total, not including our time. But but we're really proud of it because we have access. So historically, the rest of the world can see these locations inside the locations where we were. And I think it still stands up. It was low budget, but I think it's good. And then, Mike, eventually from that, we decided to do the 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, something that was more focused on one story. And the Manson Tate LaBianca murders has always been an obsession of mine since I read Helter Skelter back, 25 years ago or something like that. And when I moved out here to L.A., I went through it again with a highlighter pen. And I started the workings of doing this tour, and then Mike said, "Well, let's do this documentary about it." So we did that. So I've been lucky. Mike's been a real big supporter of what I do, and I think he's terrific. And Lloyd, who is also a co-producer, between the three of us, I think we put out a pretty good project.
Oh no, yeah, I would definitely agree with you. You call it low budget, and it, in a way it's low budget, but this is quality work. And when I first saw it, and I saw you standing there just rattling off all this facts and information that you could tell was stuff that you know in your heart and you live and you're interested in, I says, whoa, this is great stuff. What else has this guy done? And I started looking up all over the place, and I found you on Facebook. And I would encourage people even to follow you on Facebook because even your activity on there, your content on there every day is just interesting stuff. And I think you're a true artist, a true creative person. But let's start with Julia Departed, okay? Because I think there's information on there, especially about Black Dahlia, that I didn't hear anywhere else. Just last week, I had Steve Hodel, who is the LAPD detective who thinks his father is the killer.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think about his story?
I think it's a great story. I read his book and I thought it was interesting, and I think now he claims that his father was the Zodiac killer now, doesn't he? I believe that's what I thought I read.
Yeah, the lipstick killer, and he thinks there's connections to the lipstick killer and also to the Zodiac killings. Maybe not Zodiac, the Zodiac killer himself, but there was a murder when his father was down in the Philippines, and the body was left on a street called Zodiac. And he thinks that might have been like a taunting signal to the LAPD.
Okay, there are some people that get lost in this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that Hodel, his book Black Dahlia Avenger, was an interesting read, and I think that sometimes. Well, it's not for me to say, I guess. You did ask, so I suppose it is for me to say. But I'll try to be. I'm just going to be nice about it and say, it's a great story. It's a great story.
Well, then who do you see as could be the Black Dahlia killer?
This is seriously. I mean, I don't know enough about her, and I really have never been that much charmed by her to be able to by the story. I mean, it's a great story, but it's exhausting because it's unsolved. That people will never know, and that's what's the saddest thing about it. I think is that her murder will never be solved. It's physically impossible to solve that crime anymore because the evidence file has been picked over by people just going through it and took her autopsy report. So if any new evidence comes about, they can never, ever do anything with it because the autopsy report is missing from the file. So she is hopelessly, will never be avenged, for lack of a better term.
Yes, so true. One of the things he was talking about was how so much of the DA's file was hidden away here and swirled away there and just buried in different places. I don't think that I know that I don't want to go against the grain here, but I'm not really big on conspiracies. I do believe that some of them exist, but I don't think in her case, I don't know. I guess you could just keep going with it, couldn't you? You could go in circles with it. The poor thing is ended up chopped up and mutilated, and we'll never know what happened to her. And I doubt. Hopefully, she didn't know what happened to her. Yeah, that would be nice. Well, I think there's a lot of evidence she was tortured. So unfortunate.
Yeah, no, it's definite. I mean, that wound with her cut across the face from ear to ear, that was while she was still alive, and she was forced to consume excrement. I mean, those things happened, and it's horrific.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the things I picked up from your documentary was that in the movie Pretty Woman, they used her apartment as part of the set.
Right. Yeah. Well, Hollywood's a funny place. I mean, everything has some sort of pop culture reference to it. Another place, the Bordner's Bar. We did that. We did a piece of the documentary in Bordner's, and I think it was about Ed Wood. And that was also a big Black Dahlia hangout, and that was just a block away from the hotel. So it's Beth Short lived in about a dozen different locations in Hollywood in the last 6 months of her life. So a Beth Short address isn't necessarily that rare, but there will always be some kind of weird association having to do with something else in Hollywood because it's a small town. but it's made an impression worldwide.
You're considered to be sort of a Hollywood historian with the architecture and the old buildings and stuff like that as well, correct?
Well, people, yeah, you called me one.
Okay, well, now it started. Now you are. Because I know.
But no, I'm proud of Hollywood, and I like a lot about Hollywood. Now, to me, Hollywood is being taken away in dump trucks. You know, they're constantly tearing down these great old buildings, and putting up these nondescript new apartment buildings. The magic term is mixed use. That's what everyone calls it around here, where there's going to be, storefronts as well as living accommodations, et cetera. And they're everywhere. And here's our little tour company with two little vans screaming, no, don't take it. And they're taking it away in giant dump trucks. So it's us scrambling over walls and grabbing pieces of bricks and things like that to try to save what the little history we have left.
Annie had an earache on a Saturday of all days. So her mom brought her to Minute Clinic at CVS, where you can see a provider, fill a prescription, and grab essentials like pain relief products, all in one visit. Even on evenings and weekends. You can even see us online with telehealth options. For quality, affordable care on your schedule, visit Minute Clinic at CVS. That's healthier made easier. Services vary by location. See MinuteClinic.com for details.
A message from Virginia Department of Health. Some of the new COVID-19 variants spread more easily. Lower your risk of infection by staying away from large crowds and wearing a layered mask in indoor public settings.
Life gets a lot more magical when you dream. So let's dream of a vacation unlike any other. A magical Disney cruise.
Hiya, pal!
Where new stories meet tales as old as time.
Enchanté, mon ami!
And your family will be cared for the moment you step aboard. Sail from Florida to Disney's private island paradise and get ready for a dream come true with Disney Cruise Line.
I think the most insulting demolition was the Ambassador Hotel a couple of years ago. It's unbelievable that one of the most important events in American history, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, took place, and he was shot in that hotel. And it's mind-boggling to me that they destroyed that hotel and built a school that looks just like the hotel in its place, which is even more insulting. There's not a lot of respect for its history here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, especially when you consider that's a historic crime scene, which should be salvaged.
As I understand it, the pantry where he was shot is in storage somewhere. I've heard that it's been preserved just in case they have to. I mean, obviously it's not intact. They've taken it and they put it away in some storage. Probably some junkyard somewhere in a bunch of those big metal boxes. But I've heard that is the case, that they have kept that for some reason. I don't know. I'd love to reassemble it in my office.
Yeah. Now, you have quite a collection, though, of little rocks and bricks and different kinds of things. Give us an idea of what you have.
Oh, man. See, I've become sort of a receptacle for this sort of thing. When people have these things and say, I don't know what to do with it, and they'll do a little searching online and they'll find me. It started when I was, a kid growing up, and I would go, I would go to these accident sites or murder sites, and I'd take a rock or something like that, and that sort of escalated now, and I have all sorts of odd things in my collection. I think the most iconic piece I have is the big pink suitcase that Jane Mansfield packed and was in the trunk of the car she was killed in 1967. So it was the suitcase she packed the night she was killed.
Wow, how'd you get that?
Well, it was a gift. It was a gift from a friend of her family's. And I've always been big into Jane Mansfield. When her house was demolished on Sunset Boulevard, the famous Pink Palace, it had a heart-shaped swimming pool. And when I heard that it was being demolished, it was a rainy day, and there was a tunnel that ran underneath Sunset Boulevard that I was told about by a friend. So I scrambled in this tunnel in the rain under Sunset Boulevard and hopped this back fence, and was sitting in the middle of this heart-shaped hole in the ground. The pool had been demolished, and there were lots of chunks of these of the pool laying around. So I grabbed a few, and that was, you just do it at the time, but then you realize how important it is later on.
Right.
Sure, it's a silly heart-shaped swimming pool, but it was Jane Mansfield's, and it was an iconic house. So that's what started my obsession with Jane Mansfield. And then when I lived in England and I started writing findatodeath.com, I got an email from somebody, and he said, well, I saw your Jane Mansfield piece. A friend of mine was a big fan, and he has a couple of pieces of her upholstery from the car she was killed in, and he died. Do you want them? So I said, oh, sure, yeah, I'll take them. So he sent them to me. And then things sort of spiraled. I put it out online that I had these things, and then more things sort of appearing. And then about 6 weeks ago, I actually got to sit in the seat of her car that she was killed in '67. The car is still intact. It still looks just the way it did after the accident. Instead of, I don't know if there's pretty famous pictures of the car that's been bashed up with the roof ripped off of it, and quite a gruesome sight. There's a large amount of blood on the side of the car, and it's quite clear where that blood was because it's sort of now eaten into the paint, and it's still exactly the way it was that night. It's bizarre, but it's still there, including glass on the floor from the windshield.
Where is it?
So it's a private collector has it here in Southern California. So who got in touch with me and said, I have this thing, you want to come see it? I'm like, yeah. So and he said, well, then did you want to sit in it? And I'm like, I just about lost my mind. So I got to actually sit in the seat. There were still prints of in the glove box from her where her knees hit the glove box, and it was wild being in there. Really wild.
What do you think of those stories you hear about that she was trying to escape a cult or a coven or something like that, and that's how she died?
Yeah, it was Anton LaVey who was the head of the Church of Satan, and Anton LaVey was all about publicity. And Jane was too. The joke I had was that Jane would throw a press conference for a fart. She loved it. Oops, my boobs fell out. That kind of a thing. And Jane, never shied away from that. Now, Anton LaVey, he was big in the early '60s with the Church of Satan. That was kind of a hip thing. Sammy Davis Jr. He was part of the scene. Rosemary's Baby, supposedly he was the technical consultant. And when Jane Mansfield was killed in '67, Anton LaVey stepped up and said he cursed her. But Anton LaVey, as I said, was never going to shy away from a bit of publicity. So I don't think that Jane was cursed. That's my take on it. And I think it's kind of funny that Anton LaVey ended up dying on October 30th. And they tried to get his death certificate changed so it would be the 31st, and it would be more poetic, and they wouldn't let them. So he ended up dying on October 30th. It was just one of those funny things, irony, karma, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's a great story. I didn't know he tried to get his death certificate changed. That's a good one. Okay, okay, so Jane Mansfield. Okay, what else have you in collection?
Well, I have a tile from the swimming pool that Brian Jones drowned in. I have a piece of the Hindenburg. I have a piece of the lagoon from Gilligan's Island. I have Rock Hudson's Rolodex and his deathbed. I have something that's been lent to our shop is a Marilyn Monroe's cake pan, which is a hoot, and it was hers. And I have what's called the memory tube from Karen Carpenter's casket, as well as the sink from Karen's last home.
Memory tube? What's that?
In a modern day casket, it would look like to anyone else like a sort of a bolt on the side of the casket. But if you unscrew the bolt and you pull it out, it's this little cylinder. It's about 3 or 4 inches long, and in this cylinder is a rolled up piece of paper, and it has the information of the deceased: name, address, Social Security, mother, father, name of the mortuary, final disposition, and almost every modern day casket has one of those. And this was Karen Carpenter. Somebody I know worked at the mortuary and said that she this is back when Karen died, 83 I think it was, and she took it. And I met her about 10 years ago, and she said, you can have this, but you got to promise you won't tell anyone you have it until after I die. So I held up my end of the bargain, and my friend passed away, and now I can tell people I have this thing. So it's not used for legal ID, because in order to legally identify a body, you'd have to lift it up and be able to physically identify the person that's in the box somehow. But this is for the mortuary and the funeral home, so you don't have to go through all that.
Gotcha. Okay, we got about 3 minutes before the break, or 2 minutes maybe. What else do you have in your collection?
Well, let's see. I'm sure the Rock Hudson deathbed is kind of cool. I'm pretty pleased with that. I just happen to know Rock Hudson's estate manager, and what really attracted me was the Rolodex first off, because it has phone numbers of Doris Day and Elizabeth Taylor and all these iconic 60s and 70s television people. And then he said, well, I have this bed, and it's just a frame, but it's a king-size bed. It's massive. He says, I don't know if you'd be interested in this. I said, well, that's exactly what I'd be interested in. So I got it, and I couldn't display it all because it was just too big. But I did get the bedpost, and I have a photograph of him with it. So that's one of my very happiest acquisitions, because I was a big fan. And that's the thing, I was really big fans of these people. So a lot of these, it's a genuine interest and a genuine affection I have for them. Although the place I focus on is not necessarily what they would have focused on, is because they were dead. But it's another way of I think celebrating these people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you can tell that your interest, it's a genuine admiration and interest, not just a fascination with the morbidity. I tell you, I'm really impressed with your work. Now, we got the break. Okay, we're here with Scott Michaels, the owner of Dearly Departed Tours. You want to take a tour of L.A. and go around, and Scott will show you around all the famous movie stars' death scenes and where they died, where their accidents happened, all that kind of stuff. He's the owner of findadeath.com. He's the co-writer and the narrator of 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, and also Dearly Departed, 2 incredible documentaries that I could definitely recommend. The links to them are on the Opperman Report blog. You can find them on Amazon.com. We'll be back right after this message with Scott Michaels. Okay, well, we're back with the Opperman Report here. I'm your host, Ed Opperman. We have our guest tonight, who is a Hollywood historian, the newly acclaimed Scott Michaels. He's the owner of Dearly Departed Tours. He's the owner of findadeath.com. He's the owner of Jane Mansfield's Pink Suitcase. He's the owner of he worked on a co-writer and director and narrator of 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, and also Dearly Departed, which are 2 excellent documentaries that I would definitely recommend to anybody. You can find a link to Amazon.com. Coming up, next week we have Diane Diamond from Court TV. She's going to be talking about the Michael Jackson child molestation trials, and also about she wrote a book also about the Salahis, the Washington D.C. party, white D.C. gate crashers. I have a connection to both of those cases. We also have coming up Mark Rudd, one of the Weather Underground members, who met Fidel Castro. He met Che Guevara. We're going to have him on in a couple of weeks. And then we have Cindy Sheehan, the anti-war activist who went down there to Crawford, Texas, and really put a hurting on George Bush there for a few years, and it really was a thorn in his side. We want to support her. So, Scott, you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. Now, we were talking about your collection, and you were saying how your favorite thing was Rock Hudson's bed, his deathbed that he died in. Now, but you don't have enough. Do you have this in your offices for the Dearly Departed tour? Do you have space to put all this stuff on exhibit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the whole bed on display because it's just it came in pieces. So I have just the bedpost that you can see I have a photograph of him with it. And most of these items are not massive. They're I have bricks and pieces of things that used to be there. So I have about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 large glass cases with a couple of shelves in each, and they have these items in them. It's sort of a weird little museum, I suppose.
Yeah, but it's all cool stuff. Now, let's say I want to take you to.
I think it's all cool stuff.
I agree with you, man. Anything else in there that you really want to talk about? Anything good?
I mean, some of the stuff, what I really like about what we do is that sometimes we get conversations going about people that that aren't really talked about so much anymore. And maybe, possibly, on our tour you'll hear a name of an actor or an actress you may not have known before. Maybe you'll rent one of their movies. One of the really interesting stories, we're actually having a new documentary that's going to be out in the next couple of months called Dearly Departed Volume 2. And it's going to be a compilation of a lot of the stuff that we've done already that has not been released on a physical disc, like the Wonderland Murders and the story of Jane's Suitcase and the door I have from Divine's hotel room or George Burns' house. And one of them is a woman named Yvette Vickers, and Yvette Vickers was an actress. She was a Playboy model in the 50s. She was in a couple of B movies. Not a big name in Hollywood, like many others. There are thousands of them that have made little tiny marks for themselves in the movies or on television. And Yvette was one of those people. She was a Playboy model for a month in, I think it was 54, and she was in a movie called Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, but she wasn't the focal point on the film. She was she was in a couple of horror movies towards the end. But what really stuck into people's minds, it probably doesn't ring a bell, but maybe you heard a couple of years ago about that actress that was rotting away in her house for a year before anyone found her. That was Yvette Vickers, and it wasn't a year, but that's what the most dramatic reports were announcing at that point in time. It had been a couple of months, and her bills were on automatic payment, and so no one bothered to look at her because she was one of those kind of nutty people that didn't want anyone bothering her, so people didn't bother her. And she died in her house in front of a space heater, and she slowly mummified over a period of a couple of months, and she was found by a neighbor. So a friend of mine and I got access to the house, and through another, it was one friend told me about it, and another friend went with me, and Jane actually, she took some amazing video footage with it, and we got to go through Yvette's house, and actually being through those rooms where Yvette spent her life and her death was pretty interesting, and it was as if they moved out all the furniture, but all the pots and pans were still there, food was still in the cabinets, and the medicine chest was still filled with, Band-Aids and nail polish and things like that. And so actually going through this, where this woman spent her life and her death, it was pretty interesting, and it's I think to me it's of historical significance. It's not, they don't write books about people like Yvette Vickers, but she's certainly worthy of a chapter in a book because of the nutty way she died, I think. So I have a couple of her items, including the nail polish, because interestingly enough, when she was autopsied, there was not much of her left. There was, she was mummified. But the one thing that the coroner made note of in the autopsy report was that her fingernails looked great. They had been manicured, and her nails looked good. So I have her nail polish in the shop. But see, and that is just one tiny corner of one of our many little glass cases. So every single thing has a story to it, and that's the fun of it. I think we're sort of geographic storytellers.
Yeah, and you're a great storyteller, and you're right. Now, let's say first tell us what we're going to see in the next documentary besides this one you were just describing. What else is going to be in the next Dearly Departed Part 2?
Well, we are going to the Wonderland Murders. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
Oh yeah, when I first got a hold of you on Facebook years ago, you sent me the clip, and I had already seen it. But go ahead, tell us.
Yeah, the Wonderland Murders happened in the early 80s, and it was involving John Holmes, the porn star, and Eddie Nash, who was a drug lord, I suppose you could call him, in Los Angeles at that time. He owned a few nightclubs around L.A., and he was dealing a lot of coke, I think it was. And there was this gang of drug dealers called the Wonderland Gang who lived up on Wonderland Drive in Laurel Canyon, and Holmes was friends with them. And anyhow, they arranged it through Holmes to rob Eddie Nash. And Eddie Nash was you didn't mess with Eddie Nash. And so as revenge, Eddie Nash had them murdered as they were sleeping. He had his people bash their heads in with pipes, with lead pipes. And John Holmes was ordered by Eddie Nash to go to the crime scene and to get his hands dirty, as it were. So there's physical proof of John Holmes being at the crime scene.
Yeah, there was a murder trial.
Yes, there was, and he was acquitted, but he ended up dying of AIDS anyway, not that far long after that. He was a mess. Holmes was just a mess. But yeah, so when I heard that, I've heard through a friend that the house was going to be rented, and it was open. I contacted my friend Mike Dorsey, and we went. He brought his camera, and I brought myself and my notes. And we went through the house. It was empty and gone where victim 1, victim 2, victim 3 was, as well as the original police footage, which is really interesting because, they made a movie about this called Wonderland, and it was starring Val Kilmer, and it's all about, the John Holmes Association with Eddie Nash and these guys that got murdered up there. And in fairness, I was going to say these poor guys, of course, no one deserves what happened to them, but they're pretty skeezy characters. And so it's not a surprise that they played with fire and got burned. But being in that house, and the police videotaped that crime scene. That was, a police detective with a video camera went through that crime scene while the victims were still there. So what's really interesting about this is that they released the DVD, and that actual crime footage, that crime scene footage, is on the DVD as an extra feature for this movie.
Really?
So for your entertainment, you will see these victims with their heads bashed in real life as an extra feature on this film.
Yeah, there's a short scene in Boogie Nights too that also kind of almost like illustrates what happened with that an Eddie Nash type character and
yes.
John Holmes type character.
Yes, yeah. There was that wasn't. I don't think anyone will dispute that was a representation of Eddie Nash.
I'm sorry.
So we were able to take that actual police footage and go through that house and match it up frame by frame, and it was pretty wild being up there. It really was, and it was. I've been to a lot of murder locations. I've sat in a lot of places where people have died, and that one I got to say is the only one that ever really freaks me out. And
there's people living there now?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, now I just had Dave McGowan. Are you familiar with Dave McGowan?
I know that name.
Yeah, he does all that work about the weird scenes in the canyon, and he did a lot of work, wrote a couple of books about Wonderland murders and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, yeah, I just had him on like 3 weeks ago. He's a very popular guest. But now the thing that fascinates me the most about Wonderland murders, and no one hardly ever talks about it, I think you talked about it, but you don't hear any mention of it in the Wonderland with Val Kilmer, is Scott Thornton.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, tell people about that.
Well, I mean, Scott Thornton was another one. It was not a particularly stellar individual. I shouldn't be speaking about him in the past tense. He's still alive. But yeah, he was involved with Eddie Nash, and he was involved with John Holmes, and he was involved with Liberace. I mean, it's sort of the trifecta, isn't it?
And Michael Jackson.
And Michael Jackson. That's right. It was just it's funny because this is a name that I know very well, but when you take a step back and think about it, and the idea that he was involved with all of that, supposedly lovers with Michael Jackson. And it's funny about Thornton because he sold that story. I mean, the guy's a junkie, but he sold that story to the tabloids probably, 20 years ago. And it's just sort of interesting that, a lot of the, what do they say? There's no smoke without fire or something like that. And it's just some of the more questionable aspects of Michael Jackson's life didn't come to light until many years later. But there's always that Scott Thornton. It's interesting. I just think that it's not something I would dismiss straight away. That's why I like the book Behind the Candelabra. I thought it was a fascinating book. I really liked it because it was. I don't think it was necessarily character assassination of Liberace. I don't think anybody is that, amazing at all times. It was just a bare bones portrayal of Liberace, which I thought was really interesting. And he was just as bad on himself as he was about anything else. I thought it was a well done book. And the movie I thought was kind of interesting. And I was looking forward to that movie quite a bit, but it's funny how I'd forgotten really about it until we started talking about it.
The whole stuff is just so fascinating from beginning to end. I'm going to have him on as a guest when he gets out of jail. He's living,
good luck with that.
He's living at the Bunny Ranch up in Reno. Okay, we have a connection to them up there. And so as soon as he gets out of jail, he's going to go back to the Bunny Ranch, and we'll get him on the show. They already promised us. So
that's something I would definitely. I would love to phone in a couple of questions for him.
You can co-host. You can co-host with me, man. You kidding me?
That'd be a riot.
There's an amazing photo of Michael Jackson, Liberace, and Scott Thornton in a convertible Bentley on Buckingham Palace property.
It's just another day in Liberace's life.
Yeah, right. Okay, so what else is going to be in the next Dearly Departed? What else you got?
So we've got the Wonderland thing, the doors, the hotel room doors. Trying to think. I know that we just shot some new footage of the O.J. Simpson stuff. We're going to do a retracing of those crime scenes too, and what they look like today. Back in '95, when it happened, actually '94, but I took a lot of home video footage of it, and It's all changed so very much. So we're able to use that old footage and incorporate it into the new documentary. So it's going to be good. And we also, to sort of make it more, I don't know, that's not the term I want to use, but to keep it current, and we'll say that, we're adding the Paul Walker accident scene too.
What is that? I'm not familiar with that. Paul Walker?
He's the Fast and Furious kid that was just killed in November in the Porsche. So we went up there a couple of weeks ago and shot some footage up there as well. So it's going to be quite good. I'm very I'm proud of the James Dean thing. I love James Dean. I've been a huge fan since forever, and actually being able to retrace his steps in Los Angeles because there's not much left of James Dean in Los Angeles. He's been dead since 1955, but there's so much of him that's gone, his old houses and things like that. So it's interesting to be able to track down these places where Jimmy hung out, and be able to match up pictures to him in these places. They go up to where he died. It's I've been up there a few times, but this is so people who don't go to those places can see these places, and that was one of the reasons I started doing what I do, because I felt it was. I'm showing people in L.A. What I think people should see in L.A. You can go see Brad Pitt's Hedge, yeah, sure, but to me, it's more interesting to see where Bela Lugosi died, and places like that, places that made the news, and it's our history, and that's what our documentaries do. We take people to where these things happen that maybe wouldn't be able to travel, like we've been fortunate enough to be able to do.
Okay, so far in the next Dearly Departed documentary that's coming out in just a few months, we're going to have the Wonderland murders, the O.J. murders, James Dean, you said? Yeah. And what else?
Well, the Yvette Vickers film will be in there, and it's also involved with the Jane Mansfield suitcase, and these a couple of doors. I don't know if you remember. You know who Divine was?
Yeah, I do know. And you got a lot of you got a lot of guts. I was going to say something else, but you got a lot of guts, my friend, for that line in that documentary. I'm going to have some of those people involved in that case going to be on my show as well.
Gym sessions and sweaty summer activities are back, which means more funky smells in your clothes, because sweat leaves behind bacteria that causes those hard-to-remove odors. Clorox fabric sanitizer products are ready to zap the stink out of fabrics in your home by getting rid of 99.9% of odor-causing bacteria. Eliminate odors in every load, or sanitize fabrics between washes with one of our fabric sanitizer products. Search fabric sanitizer at Clorox.com to learn more. When it counts, trust Clorox. Use as directed.
Streaming only on Peacock.
She was this moneyed social girl.
Ghislaine Maxwell had it all. until she met Jeffrey Epstein.
Maxwell helped connect him to the wealthy and famous.
Then it all came crashing down.
Ghislaine Maxwell's charged with enticement of minors, sex trafficking of children, and perjury.
Now a new 3-part documentary reveals her story.
How on earth could she have got to this place?
Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Life gets more magical when you dream. So dream of a Disney cruise filled with magic and wonder.
Hiya, pal!
Sail from Florida to Disney's private island paradise and get ready for a dream come true with Disney Cruise Line.
A private investigator, a very well-known PI that's involved in that case, is going to be coming on as a guest as well. But tell us, my friend, about the whole Divine case and how she went flying off her roof.
Oh, you know, are you referring to? Now, I see where you're going with this. It's a tiny little sidetrack. You're referring to Diane Linkletter.
Oh, you're right. No. I'm referring to the Eddie Murphy case.
Oh, Divine. Oh, okay, Divine Brown. No. Okay. This is all right. So we're okay. Let me. Divine, who I was talking about originally, was a 350-pound man that played women in movies.
Okay, I'm familiar with him too. Okay, go ahead.
That's but it's interesting because you talked about somebody jumping out of a window under mysterious circumstances. Well, Divine portrayed Diane Linkletter in a movie called The Diane Linkletter Story, and Diane Linkletter jumped out of a window in 1969 off Sunset Boulevard, Art Linkletter's kid, and under mysterious circumstances because her boyfriend at the time, who was in the house, was also the boyfriend of Carol Wayne, who was the beautiful blonde that used to be on The Tonight Show that drowned in like 3 feet of water in Mexico. Right. So that's a really weird association that you had just made because it does make sense. But you're referring to, oh God, what was his name now? Kenneth Antone Sully Shalimar, who was the hooker that Eddie Murphy picked up. And not Divine Brown, who Hugh Grant picked up, but Eddie Murphy picked up Shalimar, and Shalimar was a transvestite prostitute, and Eddie Murphy was arrested with her. The police watched him pick her up on Sunset in an area that's well known for transvestite prostitutes. And Eddie picked her up and drove to an unknown location, some street somewhere, and the police busted him. But they weren't having sex, actually. They were just talking, and they arrested Shalimar, and because he had an outstanding warrant for prostitution or whatever. He spent about 3 weeks in jail. But they let Eddie Murphy go with a warning, and he said he always likes to. He said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, that every once in a while I will pick up a hooker just to talk, something to that effect. And then when Shalimar got out, he was selling stories to the tabloid that Eddie Murphy liked to lick my feet and wear my panties and stuff like that. And then weirdly, Shalimar ended up falling off the top of a 5-story apartment building, and 5 o'clock in the morning, completely stone cold sober, in a Fredericks of Hollywood bra and panties, and sort of just a convenient end to the whole thing.
Yeah, the official story is that she locked herself out of her apartment and decided to climb up on the roof and shimmy down in heels shimmy down into her window.
That's right. I forgot about that. There's she go up the fire escape, and there was a towel hung on the side of the fire escape, and you could grab that towel and swing over. Over to his window and get in that way. That's right. I completely forgot about that. And somebody told me that they found we shouldn't be laughing about these things.
No,
but somebody said that they found like Lee press-on nails, carved into the concrete practically of her scrambling to get into that window before she lost her footing.
Yeah, well, you laugh, but wouldn't you love to get those nails? I know you would.
Well, there's that.
Oh, boy.
And there was an ultimate connection too, because Shalimar and Divine, who is the 350-pound man that also played women, were both embalmed at the same mortuary on Western Avenue. There's just sort of a big full circle just happened right there.
Yeah, that is really, really fascinating. Okay, wait, there's a question come from the chat room about did Eddie Murphy do something in Vancouver? You hear anything about that?
No, that doesn't sound familiar. I might If I heard a little bit more about it, maybe, but it doesn't sound familiar.
Yeah, I never heard anything about it. But did you ever get any complaints or any kind of threatening letters or anything like that? Because you mentioned that the woman was thrown off the roof. Or
No, I haven't. I've actually been pretty fortunate that most people see. You know, the only thing that really offend people is I go for a cheap joke, you know, and some people just don't have a sense of humor.
Hey, listen, you gotta laugh. You know, you gotta laugh. But anyway, we're coming up to a break though, and this is a really long break, so you got a chance to go to the bathroom and get a drink, whatever you want to do. It's a good 5-minute break. But we're with Scott Michaels from FindTheDeath.com. We're going to ask him about that. I want to ask him what happens on his tours when people want to take his tour, and then we're going to sit back. We're all going to have a drink, and we're going to talk 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter. So if you got questions about the Charles Manson murders and that kind of stuff, Scott Michaels is an authority on this situation. He's visited all the scenes. He's been out to Death Valley. It's an incredible story, incredible documentary. Scott Michaels, FindTheDeath.com, duly departed. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here every Friday night, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You can also find these shows archived on my YouTube channel, which is called The Opperman Report. And you can also find them archived on the radio station's YouTube channel, which is called Revolution Radio. And I want to remind everybody that we're a listener-sponsored station. We have no corporate sponsors, no commercials, no nothing. So if you want to support the station, you got to go to the website, freedomslips.com, and click on the donate button. Time has gone so fast. We're on here. We only have an hour left, even less. We're with Scott Michaels, who is behind the documentary 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, another documentary called Dearly Departed. There's a Dearly Departed 2 coming out, part 2. He's the owner of FindTheDeath.com, and he runs the Dearly Departed tours in Los Angeles, over there in Hollywood tours. So, Scott, I want to ask you a couple of questions, and then we're going to get into your adventures with Helter Skelter. Okay? But tell us, what would I experience? Now, I'm thinking about coming to California and bringing my daughter with me. She's 13 years old. What would we experience on your tour? We took your tour.
Well, the tour is about 2.5 to more like 3-hour tour, about 70 different locations.
A 3-hour tour? A 3-hour tour?
Yeah. Go figure.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And an interesting Sherwood Schwartz, who created Gilligan's Island, is on our tour.
Really?
He's one of the people that we mentioned on the tour. But, it's about 70 different locations around Los Angeles where famous things happened. A lot of them, we call it the dark side of Hollywood, murders and scandals and suicides and just old natural death as well. But we also throw in a few movie locations and things like that. So the tour goes to some rather dark areas as far as, the subject matter is quite gruesome. However, we try to keep it as lighthearted as possible. We'll lighten it up with something else after that that's not so. We'll talk about the Black Dahlia, and the Black Dahlia is a horrific story. But then right around the corner is Warner Brothers, the original Warner Brothers, so we could talk about that and where Judge Judy is made. And then we'll go into another story, and then so we try to keep it lighthearted. But as far as the kids go, there's a couple of choice words, there's a couple of choice photographs that we use on the tour, and but it's no worse than anything you see on television anymore,
Yeah, even the Cartoon Network nowadays has plenty of choice material on it, so there's nothing to do about that. Okay, now what about?
Yeah, I would say I would give my tour a PG rating, and it would be I think PG safe, but it's no worse than anything on television.
Now, what about FindTheDeath.com? Tell us about that.
Well, Find a Death, I started, I was living out in the country for a while. I was living in England, and it was making me crazy I missed L.A. I missed being able to see things in L.A., like the murder locations, and I just that's one of my favorite things to do is investigate these things and to go out to find out where these things happened, where these people, where John Belushi died or something like that. So when I lived in England, it was as the internet, we'll say, was starting to kick off. And I decided to start my own little website. And there's another website called Find a Grave, where it's all the celebrity, well, it's everyone's tombstones now, gravestones. And my friend Jim Tipton owns that website. And I got to talking to Jim, and I thought, well, I'd like to start something else, but I'd like to call it Find a Death. And I cleared it with him, and he thought it was a good idea, too. So instead of taking people to the virtual cemeteries, which is what Find a Grave does, I take people to virtual crime scenes or death scenes. So someone from, I don't know, Hungary or Germany who can't make it to Los Angeles can visit, where John Belushi died via my website. Just like people in Los Angeles who might not be able to get to Paris can go see the pillar that Diana hit on my website. So it's virtual, sightseeing, I suppose. You could do virtual sightseeing of the dark side of Hollywood or the dark side of fame and fortune.
How many
But
hits?
also, just some really interesting people. Sometimes it's like my particular obsession right this minute is a guy by the name of Robert Opel, and I've been obsessed with him for a long time. He's the guy that streaked at the Academy Awards. Remember that with David Niven?
Yeah, years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it was in the 70s. But this is really interesting because it ties into the murder of Harvey Milk in San Francisco. And I assume you know who Harvey Milk was, the gay politician who was shot in City Hall by a former police officer, and the police officer ended up getting only 2 years in prison for what they called a Twinkie defense. He was so hopped up on junk food he wasn't thinking about it. And again, Harvey Milk, being an openly gay politician, was was a convenient death for a lot of people. So Robert Opel owned this art gallery in San Francisco. He was a nudist, and he was also sort of displayed some things, a lot of let's say openly sort of erotic photographs and things like that in his art gallery. And after Dan White, who killed Harvey Milk, was released from prison after such a short period of time, Robert Opel decided that he was going to hold a mock assassination of Dan White because he didn't think Dan White got justice, and the reason that being is that, because it was convenient for a lot of people that Harvey Milk, this gay politician, was killed. It served a lot of people quite well that Harvey was gone. So Robert Opel, the streaker, this guy that just happened to get his clothes off on the Academy Awards, was murdered in his art gallery in San Francisco. And some people think that the police had something to do with it for his thumbing his nose at the police department because of the assassination of Harvey Milk. It's a really complicated story, but everyone knows that guy that ran across the stage at the Academy Awards. But it's such a fascinating story behind it. And,
wait, how was he killed?
He was robbed, tied up and robbed in his shop, supposedly by a drug dealer.
Oh, really?
And Robert Opel did deal with drugs, but not on a very serious level. And he was tied up. Two other people were tied up too, but they managed to escape being murdered. But he was shot point blank in the head. And what's interesting is the guy that killed him, Robert Opel, went to jail and walked out of jail like a couple of weeks later. Literally walked out of jail in street clothes. It was it's like, okay, really, it was pretty stupid. So eventually he did get arrested again, and he is spending the rest of his life in prison. But there's a lot going on there, and it was probably had to do with the anti-gay sentiment of the police department, and because I know that Harvey Milk's Robert Opel's murder file, it was all big laugh, ha ha ha, homicide is how they labeled the evidence boxes. So it was at a time when, gay people in San Francisco and Harvey Milk, it was a culmination of a lot of things. So
wait, when did that murder take place?
Pardon me?
What year was that murder?
I think it was 75. No,
okay, back then
there
was still a lot of that. Because now today San Francisco, I'm sure half the cops are gays nowadays, right?
Yeah, right. It's not, but it was at the beginning of all of that.
Right.
And because I know when Harvey Milk died, when he was killed, they had this big, a big sort of demonstration, and it turned into a lot of pissed off gay people overturning cars and throwing things through windows and stuff like that. And that's when the cops started cracking down on gay bars again and raiding them and dragging people into the street and beating them for, it was a really interesting time, a sad time, but as any, civil rights issue has to go through that, I suppose.
Well, I think the original Milk documentary was a lot better than the Sean Penn movie. I'm sure you saw the original documentary years ago.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, the movies bring people into the story, and hopefully they'll like it enough to look a little bit further. Like you were talking about Boogie Nights and Wonderland, and I think they entice people, and hopefully they would want to explore a little bit more about the real human being, not just how they're portrayed in a film by someone else.
Okay, you ready to get into Manson?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Hey, I went up on the reason I started that was because we were talking about Fine to Death, and I said, well, there's always something that prompts something else. Here's the guy that did that. Isn't that interesting? Whatever happened to him? And that's the other thing. It's not necessarily people that are famous people, but it's it's not necessarily about people like John Wayne, but it's also people like Aunt Bee, from Andy Griffith, who turned into the crazy cat lady who lived in a house with, her bathtubs were used as litter boxes, and she had a Studebaker with 4 flat tires, or the Siamese twins, Violet and Daisy Hilton, who were, really popular on the freak show circuit back in its heyday. And after freak shows were sort of made obsolete, they ended up working at a supermarket in North Carolina. And they both sat on chairs. One worked the register, one weighed the produce. A lot of people didn't even know they were Siamese twins, let alone really, really famous sideshow performers. And so these people, are sort of the unsung heroes of mine. And those are the people that I profile. Not necessarily the biggies. Of course, the biggies are in there like Bogart and Bela Lugosi. But there's always these people that whatever happened to them? Well, there's an interesting story.
Well, did you ever look into the story of, this might really interest you, the guy who was Fan Man that used to go to all the sporting events with the sign John 3:16, and he wore the rainbow wig?
Yeah.
You remember him?
I remember that.
Do you know he took hostages?
No, you're kidding.
No, man.
Don't tell me God told him to do it, right?
Right. You know what? I don't remember what happened with that. I don't remember his motive. But he locked himself in a hotel room and took hostages with these people. I wonder if he's alive. I think he's dead today, man. So that might be a guy for you to look up and do a story about.
That is exactly it. It's something that goes, wow, that's interesting. And that's something that I definitely like stuff like that.
Yeah, well, we were saying, me and Ann were saying during the break that you must get invited to like so many parties and dinners and stuff like that. People just want to talk to you and hear all your stuff.
Well, I mean no, not really, but I do have a big mouth, and luckily I have a place where people can come and talk to me, and people do like to come to my shop, and I love talking to them. So. I'm having a good time. And then, these nuggets come out. I mean, this John 3:16 guy is fascinating to me. I'll definitely pursue that. I learn so much stuff from the people that take my tour and the people that I speak to every day. It's really, it sounds like cliche, but it's really blessing. It's a blessing. I love learning new stuff and talking to people that knew these people.
Now, you've done some TV stuff, too, like on the E! Channel and stuff like that. What have you done? Do you still have a show?
No, we did a special for E! Last October. It was called Hollywood Death Trip, and myself and an actress named Danielle Harris, who is in the Rob Zombie Halloween movies, and she was in Hatchet and a few. They call her the modern day scream queen. And Danielle and I drove around Hollywood, and I took her basically on a tour. Not on my tour, but we took. We took my tour bus, but I was showing her things that aren't normally on our tour. Stories about, Johnny Lewis, the kid from Sons of Anarchy, who was killed his landlord and then jumped off the top of a building. We did one on Dorothy Stratton, who was the Playboy model that was murdered by her husband. And we did a couple more, but the one, it's really funny. We did these things, and I spent so much time on them, and now it's not even dawning on me who they were. But the really interesting one was Ashley Ellerin. And Ashley Ellerin was this girl who lived in L.A. She was a party girl. She had a great time. The only reason we know who she is because Ashton Kutcher was supposed to take her out on a date. And he showed up to her house, and she didn't answer the door. And he looked inside the house, and he saw what he thought was red wine spilt on the ground, on the floor. And he just figured he got blown up, and he got in his car and left. Now, sometime in the 30 minutes before Ashton Kutcher got there, Ashley Ellerin was murdered by a man who many believe to be this guy named Michael Gargiulo, who's in prison for her murder right now, or actually he's awaiting trial. But to say she was murdered, Sharon Tate has nothing on Ashley Ellerin. Ashley Ellerin was stabbed so many times, she was unrecognizable as a human. She was slashed and gouged, her head, her body, everything about her was sliced up. But the reason we all know who she is, and she's not just an unknown murder victim, is because Ashton Kutcher was supposed to take her out on a date. So there is, there's an interesting piece of trivia that led me to explore her life a little bit further, which led me to being able to include her in this show and interview her friends and things like that, and give her an identity to the people that watch that show. So I was really quite proud of that show. I thought the show did well. And also we featured Brittany Murphy, and Brittany Murphy, the girl that was in Clueless and 8 Mile, and she was also friends with Danielle Harris, my co-host. So, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. After our show aired is when that whole Brittany Murphy thing blew up again. And her father got a lot of press from our show, and they wanted to open up her case. They were convinced that she was murdered, and so they got quite a lot of publicity from us. And rightfully so. I thought it was an interesting case and worthy of looking at again.
Let me ask you about Ashton Kutcher. Now, this was before he was married to Demi Moore.
Yeah, this was a long time ago. Well, 2000. I want to say 2004, maybe it was that it happened. I think.
Because that was my case. The first cell phone, the first girl that he cheated with, Brittany Jones, was my client, and I'm the one that recovered the texts and the emails and the pictures out of that cell phone.
Wow.
Yeah, small world, right?
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've kind of not joked, but we made a point that there's sort of an Ashton Kutcher death curse going on, because it was we've got the Ashley Ellerin thing. He dated Brittany Murphy for a while, and there was a woman that was on that show, the 70s show, that she overdosed not long ago. It was a stretch to be honest, but it was just interesting how Ashton's been involved in a couple of really not so nice instances.
I better watch my step then, okay? All right. What else did you do on the show then? Tell us some more about that.
Well, and the other one that we featured was Ronnie Chasen, and she was another one. There was a bit of mystery involved in her death, because Ronnie Chasen was a publicist, and she worked with Michael Douglas and Morgan Freeman, and she was a really really successful publicist and well respected and feared publicist, and she was driving home after a premiere, and she was shot at an intersection in Beverly Hills, while she sat at the traffic light waiting for it to turn green. Somebody approached her car and shot her 5 times, and it was interesting because the guy that killed her kind of killed himself. First of all, the Beverly Hills Police Department released this press release saying what happened. Then there was a guy they wanted to interview. They approached this man in this really sleazy hotel not far from where I live, actually. They approached him in the lobby, and they said, "We want to talk to you," because apparently this guy was bragging to people that lived in this hotel that he had killed Ronnie Chasen. And so the police approached him, and before they could even get a question out of him, he pulled a gun out and blew his brains out in the lobby of this hotel. So the Beverly Hills Police Department originally said that the bullets didn't match, and then they said, "Oh wait, no, they do match." And it was all not very well handled. Then the police department, Beverly Hills Police Department, refused to close the case. Now, in the state of California, legally, autopsy reports are available. If you call and put in a request for any autopsy report, you can get it. You have to go through a lot of red tape. You have to pay per page fee, etc. But they are available. the Beverly Hills Police Department refused to close the case officially, so the LA County coroner could not release those documents. So the LA County coroner reporters they're saying the case is not closed. We can't release the documents. And the Beverly Hills Police Department saying the case is closed. So there was a problem there. So I spoke to a couple of the people involved in the Beverly Hills investigation, and they said, well, the police don't. Well, actually, we tried to interview one of the police officers, and we were given a note. I still have that note that we were forbidden to speak to anybody at the Beverly Hills Police Department about this case. And there's nothing that it will make us release these documents because they can serve no interest to the public. So it was all very weird, and it didn't set right. The guy conveniently died, before they even questioned him. So and the Beverly Hills wouldn't close the case, but it was closed. And so eventually, through our documentary, and a guy by the name of Ryan Katzenbach, who's also making a documentary about her, Beverly Hills finally relented and released her documents and officially closed the case. So, the show that we did, Hollywood Death Trip, I thought it was well done. I was really proud of it. If I wasn't in it, I would have watched it because I thought it was really good. And we got some stuff done, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to watch it, and I missed it, and I was very upset. And I looked for it to see if we were going to repeat it, and I haven't been able to catch it. Is it available on YouTube or something?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
I looked for
don't think
stuff on
so.
YouTube. It's not there now.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know why it isn't, but I'm not going to be the one to put it up there.
Okay, I'll put it up. Give it to me. I'll put it on my channel. Okay, but tell me now, 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter is, I think everyone agrees, is the best work on Charles Manson and all that kind of stuff. How did you get into that, all that research, all the people you met? What can you tell us? We got about 3 minutes before the break. So give us a little preamble to it, and then we'll talk about it the last half hour.
Well, I was interested in the case since I was really young, and I think it was almost like a rite of passage in grade school. That was big. 1974 when that book came out, it was making the rounds. It was like Jaws, it was like kind of the cool book to read that summer. Pardon?
How old are you now?
I'm 52 almost.
Hey, you're exactly my age. I'm 52 as well. Go ahead.
Okay. So you remembered this happening, and it was sort of like, it was kind of a hip thing to carry around with you. It was the book Helter Skelter or Jaws or whatever. So, I read it, and I was interested in it. But when I moved to L.A., I started thinking about more of the, I don't know, how it hits more geographically. So anyway, I picked up the book, and I read it again. This time I read it with a highlighting pen. And I went over it, and I sort of put these pins in a map and started figuring out where everything took place, and it was interesting to revisit these cases. And it was just something that I did on my own because it interested me. And then when I started when I was working at the sightseeing company, the Graveline Tour, eventually I wanted to do something that concentrated a little bit more on that. So eventually when I started my company, that's when I put that plan into motion. And it was Mike Dorsey that actually we were trying to come up for a subject for another documentary, and we agreed on the Manson thing. And we didn't want to get into the how could this have happened, the homecoming queen and broken homes, and we didn't, that stuff's been done, and we all know what happened. And I don't think there's any much more to learn about these people, but it's interesting to me to go where these things actually happen. Again, it goes down to what I do. And it's geographic, and being able to actually see these places, to actually see where those killers hosed off in the driveway afterwards, and to be able to go to the little cliff where they threw the clothes off the cliff, and where they threw the gun out of the car window, where it landed. It put a whole different spin on things for me. And then doing the documentary, we were able to incorporate a whole lot more into it. With the minutia, but we were able to go to the caves and by the Spahn Ranch and drive all the way to Death Valley.
We'll get back to that. Scott Michaels, who was the co-producer and co-writer of 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter. He runs Doing the Pardon tours. He also did another documentary. Thanks, Amazon. He's also doing RideTheDeath.com. Incredible, fascinating guest. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We have an excellent show tonight. As a matter of fact, I'm getting overwhelmed with people trying to call in. I don't think we're going to take calls, guys. You know, Scott just has so much to say, and I got my own questions I want to ask him. But I want to remind everybody that this Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, we're having a special broadcast of the Opperman Report, March 9th, 2 p.m. Sunday. We're going to have Jim Fetzer, the JFK assassination expert, Oli Damagard from Sweden, who's, again, the owner of lightonconspiracies.com, and also Mayor Jim Rothstein, the NYPD retired detective who investigated Son of Sam, and he investigated the Process Church, and he also arrested a Watergate burglar, Frank Sturgis, and Sturgis confessed to him as being one of the shooters. These guys, Fetzer and Domagard, have information about an unprecedented serial killer with over 1,000 victims who was used in political assassinations and all fun thrill kills, and even the John Lennon killing. So that's going to be 2 o'clock this Sunday. Scott Michaels. Because I was going to call you Michael first, and then I caught myself. But let me ask you this. Now, in your investigation of Manson, did you come up with anything, information about the Process Church?
No, you know what? That was one that sort of, I stick with the main players. You know, that's something, yeah, I've read about that, but I don't know enough about it to make any kind of educated statement about it. It's something that...
Gym sessions and sweaty summer activities are back, which means more funky smells in your clothes, because sweat leaves behind bacteria that causes those hard-to-remove odors. Clorox fabric sanitizer products are ready to zap the stink out of fabrics in your home by getting rid of 99.9% of odor-causing bacteria. Eliminate odors in every load, or sanitize fabrics between washes with one of our fabric sanitizer products. Search fabric sanitizer at Clorox.com to learn more. When it counts, trust Clorox. Use as directed.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy is suspected of having killed as many as 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series that investigates the crimes that shocked the nation.
The thing everybody thought they knew wasn't the whole story.
John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now. Devil in Disguise. Only on Peacock.
Life gets more magical when you dream. So dream of a Disney cruise filled with magic and wonder.
Hiya, pal!
Sail from Florida to Disney's private island paradise and get ready for a dream come true with Disney Cruise Line.
That sort of happened on the periphery. The 7 sort of infamous Tate LaBianca victims are the people that I sort of concentrate on, as well as the murderers that were directly involved with that case. So yeah, that other stuff I find really interesting, and I've read about it, but I don't know enough about it to be able to comment.
Okay, no problem. So go through your story. Tell us about Helter Skelter, how you started investigating it, the different locations you've been to, the different people you talked to and spoke with.
Yeah, it was something we started, or I started just because out of an interest of it, and it was from the victim's perspective. I mean, there's so many books that have been written about Charles Manson, and there's been a book written by Tex Watson. There's been a book written about Leslie Van Houten. There's been a book written about Patricia Carmichael. All these killers, but you've never seen a book about Abigail Folger out there, or Lino LaBianca. Well, there is a book about him, but I'm just saying the victims are sort of the people that I wanted to concentrate on, because they don't really get the recognition. They ended up, Abigail Folger's reading a book in bed in her nightgown, and within 30 minutes becomes one of the most infamous victims in American history. So with that in mind, that's how I started researching it. I what Abigail did on the last day of her life, where she saw her psychiatrist, and where she bought a bike that day, and the people's last movements really interest me. So, went to Jay Sebring's old salon and his old home up in Benedict Canyon, and being able to find all these places, actually be in these places, gave me better perspective on the victims. So so being able to go to these locations and show people and tell these stories was really important for me to do, and I think that we did a pretty good job of it.
Oh yeah, I think that documentary is just incredible. Now, what was it like taking that trek out to Death Valley to the scene of the arrest for the family?
The Barker Ranch, so the Manson family during the time of the murders were living at the Spahns Ranch, which was in Chatsworth, about maybe 20 miles from Los Angeles, west. Barker Ranch is where they took off to after the murders when they started getting paranoid. And the Barker Ranch is in Death Valley, about 185 miles from here. But it takes over 5 hours to get to it because so much of it is off-road. You go to this little town called Trona, and that's the last time you get any phone signal. It's about another 40 miles from there, and then you get to a little not a ghost town completely. There's only one little store. It's called Ballarat, and those guys leave at 5 o'clock on Friday and don't come back till Monday, and that's 20 miles away from the Barker Ranch. So after that, you're on your own, and it's off-road, and you're going through some pretty rough terrain, and you get to this little tiny house in the middle of the desert. And that's where they were living at the time they were arrested. Somebody in the family knew somebody that had a house up that way, and long story short, they ended up at this particular house. Now, it's on federal property, or it's in Death Valley National Park, and while the Manson family were living there, they were stealing dune buggies, and they were a nuisance. The people were complaining about them. Hikers were complaining about them, and people that had neighboring ranches were complaining about the hippies that were a nuisance. And they also torched a bulldozer back then. They were still, and they still are. The Manson family are still environmentalists, and so they torched a bulldozer. And since they have enough federal property, that's where they got arrested. The feds got involved, and they raided the ranch, and they had all of the killers. Almost all the killers. And that's when Susan Atkins was one of those people that got arrested. She blabbed to her cellmate, guess what we did? And that blew the whole case wide open. Through no diligence in any law enforcement agency, it just so happened that they happened to arrest one of the killers who had a big mouth, and that's how the case was solved. Now, this ranch, as I said, it's 185 miles from L.A., 20 miles from any people, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And the first time I went was with a friend, and we did it on a whim, and it was one of the stupidest things I'd ever done. I was in a Jeep. I didn't have a roof on it. We're in the desert. We only had like one 12-ounce bottle of water with us, and we got to that house, and I realized then if I turned the engine off on my car and it didn't start up again, we'd be really screwed. So that was a bit nerve-wracking. But we went into the house, and there were beds made, and there were books on the bookshelf, and there's this old beat-up refrigerator in there, and but there's no electricity. But you open up the refrigerator, and there was like potato chips and dry food, that's there to keep the animals away. So we thought, oh, this is weird, and we looked around, and then we left about an hour later, probably less than that. What I didn't really process at that time was that those things were there, that somebody was staying there. Those beds were made. There were books there. Because when I went back the second time, nobody was staying there. When I went back with the guys making the documentary, I swore I'd never go back because it really freaked me out. There's going to be people probably up in the hills watching us when we went in there the first time. But, I'm just, going about my merry business. And then only in retrospect did I realize that somebody was actually there, and they were probably watching us from the hills. So when I went back, I didn't want to go back, but Dorsey again and Lloyd Adams, who is our other co-producer, they said, well, let's do this. We'll all three go, and one with a stun gun. I figured, okay, there's a few of us. There's four of us all together. I'd go back and with these other guys. So we did, and luckily we did because we got some great footage of it, and then it burned. And it's no longer there. So now you can see this ranch forever on our little movie. So that's from a historical perspective, I'm really glad that we did that. I'm glad we did it anyway.
Well, taking that trip up there,
the footage exists.
How could they possibly have gotten that bus out there? You drove the road.
We went the way from Los Angeles, but there's another road in from the Vegas side, and as I understand it, because the police raided the ranch too. There were 40 police cars up there or something like that. they came in from the opposite direction.
What would make Manson go to Vegas and go that direction?
I don't know. Well, somebody in the family knew somebody that had a ranch in that
gotcha.
quote unquote neighborhood. So must have known something. Must have known the way in. But when you're there, it's like improbable. You think about it. It's like, how could this have happened? But the whole thing is like a bizarre kismet. How did they get away with it for as long as they did? The police had the gun in their possession 3 weeks after the murders, but yet they didn't know until December, and the murders happened in August. There was a perfect fingerprint left at the crime scene that one of the police officers happened to screw up. It was so many what ifs. And so many things that unfolded in such a bizarre fashion that it's amazing they got away with it for as long as they did. You just think, how could this have happened? But they did.
And what about, you hear all these stories, I'm sure you listened to the Mae Brussels tape about, Manson. What about the fact that they had field radios, Army field radios? How did they get that? What's the story behind that?
Manson got a lot of stuff. They were going to have this army out there. First of all, the theory of helter skelter, it was very convenient for the prosecution. I don't believe that Manson believed in helter skelter. I do believe he convinced a lot of other people of it. But they were going to, I don't know. I think it was more about drugs than anything else. And maybe, a little bit more paranoia. I think they would have stayed in L.A. if they weren't paranoid and going out to the Barker Ranch from L.A. But, it sounds so much more sophisticated when you say it that way, and it just really wasn't. It just was something that, it's like brainwashing. It sounds so, cat burglary. I mean, I guess there's all things that you could define. You could use what the Manson family did, but there's such sophisticated terms for what they ended up, what they were really doing. It was all very bare bones. It is, again, amazing how they got away with it.
Have you had a chance to speak to Manson or any of the people around him?
No. The only ones I want to talk to would be the girls. And the girls will never talk to me about what I want to talk about. So, and Manson is someone, no, I have no interest in speaking to. And it's not a moral thing. There's nothing about him that I could possibly learn. And there's nothing about anything that comes out of his mouth that I could trust.
Yeah.
He's a criminal. He's convicted. He's a liar. He's a thief. He's a con man. He'd be the first one to tell you that. So there's nothing I could learn. But for some reason, he's still an attraction for a lot of people. It amazes me how, the Manson family is still alive and well and growing.
Well, you must have get a lot of people contacting you about that story, people that are fans of his and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah, I've gotten approached by a few people that know him, and it's never been. I've gotten a couple of choice phone calls, people leaving messages and things that weren't very nice, and occasionally things show up in my mail that isn't very nice.
Really?
But it's weird. Luckily I've kept my nose pretty clean and not involved myself. It's also, it's interesting about the Manson followers, but there are people that follow the case from the victim's perspective. There's 3, I think, online groups of people that are obsessed with the case, obsessed with the truth behind the case, but they all hate each other.
Right.
So it's like, you can know a lot about it, but you better not know more than me, or I'm coming for you. You're full of it. And it's quite awful. So, if from the opposite perspective, you've got the Manson family who, like it or not, they seem to be, at least they own what they do, and these other people who claim to be, going up for victims' rights, and they're just foul to each other and to members of the Tate family, which I find quite shocking. So, there's really I've managed to keep my nose clean. I've been fortunate. I've never been really a focal point of any of that business. A lot of the people think I'm full of crap, and that's fine. You're entitled to that, most certainly. But opening up my life to that case has been very interesting, and it's been exposed me to a lot of people I wouldn't have normally met. Some I'm glad, some I'm not, but I can't say it hasn't been interesting.
Now, one of the things I remember from your documentary was that a lot of these homes where the murders took place and stuff like that were later purchased by people who are, again, fascinated with these with the deaths and with the murders. And one of them wasn't a guy from like a musician, and he took the door as well.
Yeah. Well, he didn't buy it. He was only a renter. And because the guy who owned the house at the time of the murders, his name was Rudolph Altobelli, and he owned the house, and he rented the house furnished. So, and after the murders, he lived in the house for, I don't know, about 20 years, I think, and then he was renting it out. And the last person to rent the house before its demolition was Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. And they recorded an album of theirs. It was called Downward Spiral in the living room where J. Sebring and Sharon were murdered. And they also recorded Marilyn Manson's first album in that very living room as well.
Right.
So, and Trent was the last person to live in the house before its demolition, and he indeed took the front door with him that on the night of the murders had the word pig written on it in Sharon Tate's blood. Now, that had been cleaned off, almost immediately after the investigation was over with. But it's still an amazing, iconic piece of evidence that he owns.
What do you think their motivation is for wanting to be in that home and record in that home?
I think that it's hard to say. There's a lot of that kind of Marilyn Manson, look at me kind of stuff.
Right.
And aren't I being dangerous now? Look at me, I'm being very dangerous now. Isn't it what I'm doing dangerous? And that's sort of the vibe I get. Maybe I'm wrong, and I'll probably hear about it. But that's sort of, it's more about, aren't I being weird? It's good publicity. It was great publicity. Axl Rose recording a Manson song. I mean, what's the point of that? They're not that good, but he did it to be dangerous, and it got him a lot of publicity. And it also made some of the family members some money, so that wasn't a bad thing. It's just, I think it's more about how you want to be perceived, and you want to be perceived as dangerous, and I think that's why they did it.
Okay, so now those are the ones who recorded in the homes, but there were others that bought some of these locations in these homes that were perhaps motivated, maybe not as lightheartedly interest that you have, but maybe had some other kind of interest of like summoning up the dead, or or like being around that kind of being around evil, like they enjoy the presence of evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure, Ed, what you mean. I mean, it's for the two locations involved with the murder. As far as I know, were never purchased by anybody that were interested in the murders. They certainly were acknowledged, but the La Bianca house, I think, has changed hands twice. And the Tate house, was owned by Altobelli up until the time of its demolition, really. So the interesting story about the Tate house was that when it was destroyed in late 1993, it was destroyed by two brothers who bought the property on spec. They bought it from Altobelli. They were going to tear it down and build an amazing house on that property. And they ended up tearing down the house, starting a new house, and worked on it for quite a while, and they ran out of money. And they realized they had to sell it, so they put it on the market for $8,765,400. It went for under $2 million.
Really?
And a guy by the name of Jeff Franklin bought it, and Jeff Franklin produced Full House, and he's a television producer. And he decided to complete the house. So after he completed it, and he moved in, it took 14 years from the original demolition of that house where the Tate murders happened until that property was inhabited once more. So a lot of people say it was cursed property. Well, I don't think so, because it was fine up until the time the house was demolished. But it was certainly a comedy of errors afterwards and financial disaster for some people.
Yeah, they took a huge hit.
Yeah, and also there was a woman that rented the guest house up there for a long time, and she would she would take people on tours if you gave her $50. She'd show you around the property, and she ended up writing a book with one of Sharon Tate's nieces, I think. It's that Altobelli himself told me that he's never had any weird experiences up there. The only weird experience he had was with people wanting to see the crime scene. And that is another thing. It was like a rite of passage for people that brought up in Los Angeles. In high school, we went up to the Tate House. I hear it quite a bit, and it's kind of neat in a sense because what I'm doing is the same sort of thing. And the documentary, The 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, lets everyone be able to do that. We were able to procure that footage that somebody shot in the house shortly before it was destroyed, and so you can walk through that house now. And the house is no longer there. So to me, again, historically, I'm quite proud of the documentary because if nothing else, you can watch it without the volume on and see some pretty cool locations.
Yeah, it's so true. It archives history, So
yeah.
you really are a historian. I'm glad I gave you that that name there. It's going to stick with you too. Oh, brother. What else can you tell us about? What do you want to get out, and what's really on your heart that you'd really like to get out to the audience tonight?
Oh, I'm a lucky guy. I love what I do, and I'm just fortunate enough to be able to share this really cool information with people. And for some reason, people have embraced me in that sense that they don't mind hearing me tell these stories, and I think they and that's an honor. It's a real honor to be able to be a trusted source for this sort of information. So I'm pleased about that, and I wish I had more time to spend on doing this sort of stuff. Now that I started a tour company, it's there's a lot more going on. There's a lot of other things that are occupying my time, which isn't letting me spend as much time doing the fun stuff, but I guess that's just called having a job. So it's weird to make your job what the thing you love the very, very most is become my job. So in one sense, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. In another sense, my job, my favorite thing has become my job. So it's put a different spin on it. But you know what? I'd much rather be doing what I'm doing right now than I really can't think of anything else.
Digging ditches, yeah. Or the PI business. You don't want to do that either. So tell us about the future of the tour company. I know you have the ghost tours coming up. How can people get a hold of you? Give us your phone number, everything, man. Give it out.
We had, because of what I do, and because I can string along a sentence or two, I show up on a lot of television programs, and more recently I've been on Haunted History and another one called Haunted Collector, and they come to me for the historic sort of backstories of some of these people that they investigate. And just because we have a good reputation in Hollywood, I decided that we'd venture out and do something a little bit more ghosty. So starting in April, we're going to have the Hollywood Ghosts and Legends tour. It's about a little over an hour-long tour of Hollywood Boulevard and all the great stories from the golden age of Hollywood up to present day. I'm just really excited about that because I don't think that there's a really I don't know many paranormal tours in Los Angeles, to be honest with you. And we have a good reputation, and our information is solid. So I'm excited about the tour. And then hopefully within the next year, we'll be doing a murder tour of Los Angeles too. We kind of do that now, but our focus will be on the murders, or will be on the Night Stalker and the Hillside Strangler and Manson and the Black Dahlia, and instead of just the let's just say the lighthearted look, but we're going to go a little bit more intense, concentrated is a better word for it, on these particular cases. So hopefully those things will come about in the next year. But so we're still plugging away. We are in a little shop on Hollywood Boulevard. On Sunset Boulevard, the Dearly Departed Tours Gallery, and we're on the web at dearlydepartedtours.com. And you could see a lot of the things that are in our gallery on our website, and you get the link to findadeath.com, which is my, I guess you could call it a blog of the hows and wheres of where people died and what ended up with them. So findadeath.com and dearlydepartedtours.com is where you'll find me.
Scott Michaels, I can't thank you enough, my friend. You're a fascinating guy. You're an artist, a creative guy. Everything you contribute, man, I'm so thankful for you to come on the show, man. I want to have you on again in the future. Maybe when you start the new tour and the new video comes out, we can have you back, and we'll go over more stories, fascinating stories. Scott Michaels, findadeath.com, dearlydeparted.com. His videos, there's 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, and Dearly Departed Tours are available on Amazon.com. There's a link on my blog, the Opperman Report blog. Scott Michaels, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed. I'll be looking forward to hearing you on Sunday.
Okay, hold on a second.
Streaming only on Peacock.
She was this moneyed social girl.
Ghislaine Maxwell had it all until she met Jeffrey Epstein.
Maxwell helped connect him to the wealthy and famous.
Then it all came crashing down.
Ghislaine Maxwell's charged with enticement of minors, sex trafficking of children, and perjury.
Now a new 3-part documentary reveals her story.
How on earth could she have got to this place?
Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell. Streaming now, only on Peacock. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals. John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
Clowns can get away with murder.
And Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Snapped. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.
Are you ready to see every Fixer Upper episode ever? Woo! Your favorite moments, plus all new episodes. The streaming home of Fixer Upper, plus even more from Magnolia Network. Discovery Plus. Stream now for just $4.99.
Streaming only on Peacock.
She was this moneyed social girl.
Ghislaine Maxwell had it all until she met Jeffrey Epstein.
Maxwell helped connect him to the wealthy and famous.
Then it all came crashing down.
Ghislaine Maxwell's charged with enticement of minors, sex trafficking of children, and perjury.
Now a new 3-part documentary reveals her story.
How on earth could she have got to this place?
Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell. Streaming now, only on Peacock. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals like John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
He said to me, clowns can get away with murder.
Dr. Death, the undoctored story.
This guy's dangerous.
And Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
There was this whole other world going on.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Buried in the Backyard and Snapped. And with the Dateline 24/7 channel that's always on.
Did you want her dead?
You can't not obsess. Sign up now at peacocktv.com. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals like John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
He said to me, clowns can get away with murder.
Dr. Death, the undoctored story.
This guy's dangerous.
And Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
There was this whole other world going on.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Buried in the Backyard and Snapped. And with the Dateline 24/7 channel that's always on.
Did you want her dead?
You can't not obsess. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.